Number 9, Final Fantasy IX for the PlayStation. The PlayStation era and Final Fantasy VII are what got me into RPGs, and while I loved Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII, it was Final Fantasy IX that was the best out of the 3D Final Fantasy era. Crazy story, I'll be honest, I didn't like Final Fantasy IX as much as 7 and 8 when I first played it back in 2000. Sure, I still loved it and replayed it a ton, but it wasn't until years later that I grew a deeper appreciation for it. As I got much older, my taste changed. Revisiting it on the PSN, I was blown away completely. Final Fantasy IX mixes the old with the new extremely well. While Final Fantasy VII and 8's protagonist had a more angsty or emo direction at times, Zidane was bursting with personality. Okay, before we go any further, I need to set something straight here. Now, Cloud technically is not that emo in Final Fantasy VII. It was Advent Children in Kingdom Hearts that made him emo. And, well, Squall, he pretty much remained emo for the rest of Final Fantasy VIII. So, yeah. Alright, continue! Zidane was upbeat, a jokester with high energy, and was ready to take on anyone or anything that stood in his way. Combine all that with caring deeply about his friends, and you have one of the best protagonists of all time. Speaking of characters, some of them change over the course of the game, and that's one of my favorite things as well. I remember I could not stand Steiner, but he changed at a certain point, and I respected him a whole bunch. He became one of my favorites. Of course, I have to mention Vivi, one of my favorite characters of all time, if not my favorite character in Final Fantasy IX. The cute little mage all alone, struggling to find out why he exists and what his purpose in life is. Zidane and Vivi create a brotherly relationship that feels like it's deeper than real brothers. He honestly felt like a son to me. I cared about him so much and his bond with Zidane. There's a certain scene I want to talk about with Zidane and Vivi that made a real impact on me. More on that later. Lastly, I'll speak about Beatrix. She is a high commanding officer, the Queen's right-hand woman, so to speak. You face her many times throughout the course of the game. She is super intimidating, especially when her music comes on and she wipes out your entire party. The fact of the matter is, later on she finds out she's being used, and also changes over the course of the game. It's too bad you can never put her in your party, but that didn't stop me back in the day from using Game Shark to get her in and using her the entire game. One of the biggest reasons why Final Fantasy was so amazing was of Yamatsu's musical genius. And Final Fantasy IX is no exception. Each time this man did a soundtrack for Final Fantasy, he always knocked it out of the park. His catchy, music-building contributions to the world will always stick with us forever. To the breathtaking opening of the game, brilliant stage play, to the blood-pumping, ominous boss music. Mysterious and haunting Bramble. He created such treasured memories for us. There's a scene in the game that's one of my favorites, but probably insignificant to many. Zidane and Freya are just chilling and hanging out in a bar, all casual like. You got this catchy, laid-back tune playing, while Zidane is messing around with Freya and catching up just like old times. I love that scene. Then there's that scene I wanted to talk about. After finding out who he really is, Zidane has trouble dealing with it and snaps at Vivi at one point. I'm not ashamed to admit, I was in tears. The reason why this scene is so powerful is because the track that plays, You're Not Alone, mixed with Zidane struggling with this new knowledge, on top of him showing deep brotherly love to Vivi and ensuring he'll never be alone again, it gets me every time. The characters are so well made, you are deeply invested in them compared to other RPGs. I loved the Chocobo Hot and Cold minigame. It almost felt like its own game. A game within a game. I was super happy that they brought back all the different colored Chocobos from Final Fantasy VII. Great stuff. Kuja was a great villain. The final battle ends in a climax. When Zidane finds out the truth about himself, he also finds out that Kuja and him are alike. Brothers in a way. Even after all the terrible things Kuja has done, he doesn't just defeat him and call it a day like other RPGs. He says to the gang, "Sorry guys, I can't leave. There's still something I have to do." He risks his life to get into the place they fought and stays by his side until the final breath. Everything you find out about these two, it gives you a deeper feeling for the ending. I know some people didn't like there was an extra boss after Kuja, but I loved the surprise what the fuck boss at the end. It actually made the game better in my opinion. Sakaguchi, the director and mastermind of Final Fantasy series, said that this game was his favorite out of the entire series, and that forms a deeper connection with me. I could go more in depth about Final Fantasy IX, but I think I've said enough. Final Fantasy IX has many great moments. Great character progression, great story and villain, deep atmosphere and world that comes together with a magical soundtrack by Yamatsu. This is a classical RPG you'll never forget.
君へつながるコカ・コーラ